Ladies and gentlemen, there was a time you saw clearly. You had vision, purpose, direction. But somewhere along the way, life got blurry. Disappointments clouded your faith. Fear dimmed your hope. Doubt distorted your dreams. But hear me today, God did not create you to live in the dark. He is the God who restores, the God who gives sight to the blind, the God who removes every lie the enemy has used to blur your perspective. So today, we're not just talking about eyesight, we're talking about insight. Because when God restores your sight, He's not just helping you see the world, He's helping you see who you really are. It's time to take back your vision. Just because you lost sight of your purpose doesn't mean God has. Life has a way of blinding us, not all at once, but little by little. A setback here, a disappointment there, a delay that feels like denial, and before you know it, the vision you once had is blurred. You start questioning whether you even heard God right in the first place. Was that dream really from Him? Did He really call you to that purpose? Did He actually put that passion in your heart? The enemy wants nothing more than to convince you that just because you can't see it right now, it no longer exists. But let me remind you, just because the sun is hidden behind the clouds doesn't mean it's not still shining. God never loses sight of what He has planned for you. He sees the whole picture while you're struggling with the small pieces when you feel lost. He knows exactly where you are. When you can't see the way forward, He has already mapped out your steps. When you're standing in the middle of confusion, wondering if you've wasted too much time or if you've gone too far in the wrong direction, He's still holding on to the vision He placed in you. The vision is not gone. It's just waiting for you to see it again. In Mark 8, there's a story of a blind man brought to Jesus for healing. Jesus didn't just heal him instantly. He touched him, and the man saw partially. People looked like trees walking around. So Jesus touched him again, and this time his sight was fully restored. That means restoration can come in stages. Maybe you only see a little bit right now. Maybe you feel like you're walking in a fog, trying to piece things together. But don't let partial vision make you think God isn't still working. If He started something in you, He will complete it. The enemy wants you to confuse delay with defeat. He wants you to believe that if you can't see the vision right now, it no longer exists. But God is saying, I never lost sight of you. He's waiting to restore what you thought was lost. Your vision is not gone. It's still alive. And when the time is right, you will see it clearly again. Doubt distorts, but faith restores clarity. Life has a way of making us question what we once believed with confidence. You start out strong, full of faith, full of expectation, seeing the possibilities ahead of you. But then something happens, a failure, a delay, an unexpected challenge, and suddenly the vision starts to fade. What was once clear becomes clouded by fear. What once felt certain now feels like a distant hope. You begin to second guess yourself, second guess what God spoke over you, and second guess whether you were ever meant to step into that calling. Doubt creeps in like fog, making everything look uncertain. But doubt is a distortion, not a reality. It doesn't change what's true. It only changes how you see it. The enemy wants to use doubt to keep you stuck, to make you believe that if you can't see the answer, there isn't one. He wants to blur your vision so you settle for less, so you give up on the dream, so you walk away from the calling. But faith is the lens that brings everything back into focus. Faith doesn't ignore the obstacles, but it sees beyond them. Faith doesn't pretend the storm isn't there, but it knows who's in control of it. Faith restores what doubt tries to distort. Peter experienced this firsthand when he walked on water toward Jesus. As long as he focused on Jesus, he walked with confidence. But the moment he looked at the wind and the waves, doubt took over, and he began to sink. The storm didn't change. His perspective did. He let what he saw overpower what he believed. But even as he started to go under, Jesus reached out and lifted him up. That's what God does for us when we feel like doubt is pulling us down. He reminds us that faith is stronger than fear. The battle isn't about what's happening around you. It's about what you choose to focus on. If you focus on the problem, the vision stays blurry. But if you focus on God, the picture becomes clear again. Faith is the key to restoring your sight. It's not about seeing everything perfectly. It's about trusting that even when things look unclear, God is still in control. Faith corrects the distortion, removes the fog, and brings everything back into the right perspective. What you focus on determines what you see. Two people can look at the same situation and see completely different things. One sees failure, the other sees an opportunity to grow. One sees an obstacle, the other sees a setup for a breakthrough. The difference isn't in the situation, it's in the perspective. Your focus shapes your reality. If you spend all your time looking at what's wrong, what's missing, and what's not working, then that's all you will ever see. But if you shift your focus to God's promises, His faithfulness, and His power at work in your life, suddenly the whole picture changes. The enemy's strategy is to keep your eyes fixed on the wrong things. He wants you to focus on past mistakes so you feel unqualified. He wants you to focus on your limitations so you feel incapable. He wants you to focus on how far you still have to go, so you forget how far God has already brought you. But you don't have to accept the enemy's version of your life. You can choose to change your focus. The same way a photographer adjusts the lens to bring the right subject into focus, you have the power to adjust your perspective and bring clarity to what God is doing. The Israelites struggled with this in the wilderness. God had promised them the land, but when they sent spies to check it out, most of them focused on the giants instead of the promise. They saw themselves as grasshoppers instead of conquerors. Their focus on the problem made them believe the promise was impossible. But Joshua and Caleb saw the same land, the same giants, the same challenges, and still declared, "We can take it." Their focus wasn't on the size of the enemy, but on the size of their God. And because of that, they were the only ones from their generation who stepped into the promise. You don't have to deny reality, but you do have to decide what reality you will live by. Will you focus on what's against you, or will you focus on the God who is for you? Will you focus on your lack, or will you focus on God's provision? Will you focus on your fears, or will you focus on His promises? The power is in your perspective, and when you shift your focus, your vision will be restored. Restoration comes when you trust His promise. Sometimes we expect God to move instantly, to fix everything in a moment, to heal what's broken without delay. But more often than not, restoration happens in stages. It's a process, not an event. Just because you don't see the full picture yet doesn't mean God isn't working. The challenge is trusting Him when things don't happen on your timeline, when prayers don't seem to be answered right away, when the vision He gave you still feels out of reach. In Mark 8, when Jesus healed the blind man, it didn't happen in an instant. Jesus touched him, and the man said he could see people, but they looked like trees walking around. His vision was still blurry. Jesus touched him again, and then his sight was fully restored. That means there are moments in life when you're in between, where you see something, but it's not fully clear yet. You've made progress, but you're not there yet. You've seen God move, but you're still waiting for the breakthrough. And in those moments, the enemy will try to convince you that partial healing means no healing, that an unfinished miracle means God isn't working. But what if that second touch is coming? What if you're in the middle of the process and God is still at work? Trusting God's timing means understanding that just because it hasn't happened yet doesn't mean it won't. When Lazarus was sick, his sister sent word to Jesus, but He didn't come right away. By the time He arrived, Lazarus had already been dead for 4 days. It looked too late. It looked hopeless. But Jesus wasn't delayed. He was right on time for the miracle He intended to perform. If He had come earlier, they would have seen a healing, but because He came when He did, they witnessed a resurrection. Sometimes God's timing doesn't make sense until you see what He was setting up all along. The process may not be comfortable. It may take longer than you expected. But if you trust that God is working behind the scenes, you won't panic in the waiting. What He started, He will finish. What He promised, He will fulfill. And even when you don't understand the process, you can trust the one who holds the outcome. True vision isn't just about the future. It's about seeing God in the present. Too often we equate vision with what's ahead, our dreams, our goals, the things we're striving toward. And while it's important to have a picture of where you're going, real vision isn't just about what's coming. It's about what's happening right now. If you're only focused on the future, you might miss what God is doing in this moment. Sometimes we pray for clarity about what's next while overlooking the miracles in front of us. We ask God for a sign, but we ignore the evidence of his faithfulness that's already in our lives. In Exodus, when Moses encountered the burning bush, he wasn't looking for a sign from God. He was just tending sheep. But when he turned aside to see, that's when God spoke to him. If he had been so focused on what was next, he might have walked right past the very thing that was calling him into purpose. The key to restoring your sight is not just about seeing where you're going, but recognizing where God already is. When Jesus fed the 5,000, the disciples were overwhelmed by what they lacked. They saw the crowd, the hunger, the impossibility of the situation. But Jesus saw the 5 loaves and 2 fish. He didn't focus on what was missing. He focused on what was available, and through that, the miracle happened. The enemy wants to keep you so fixated on what you don't have, what hasn't happened yet, what still feels out of reach, that you fail to see how God is moving right now. But what if your breakthrough isn't in the next season? It's in this one. What if the provision you're waiting for is already in your hands? What if the clarity you're asking for isn't about the future at all, but about shifting your perspective in the present? Vision is not just about looking ahead. It's about looking around. It's about seeing God in the middle of your current situation, recognizing his hand in the everyday moments, and trusting that he is working even when you don't understand how. The more you acknowledge his presence now, the clearer the future will become. The more you focus on his faithfulness today, the less you'll worry about tomorrow. Sometimes the sight you need most is not a vision of what's next, but a revelation of what's already here. Restoring your sight isn't just about seeing with your eyes, it's about seeing with your faith. It's about recognizing that even when life feels blurry, God has never lost sight of you. Your vision may have been clouded by doubt, fear, or disappointment, but that doesn't mean it's gone. Just because you lost sight of the promise doesn't mean God has. He still has a plan. He still has a purpose. And he is still working. It's time to refocus. It's time to stop looking at the obstacles and start looking at the opportunities. It's time to stop focusing on what's missing and start seeing what God has already provided. The enemy wants you to believe that what's ahead is uncertain, but God is saying, I am with you now. He's restoring your sight step by step, moment by moment. He may not show you everything at once, but if you trust him, he will guide you exactly where you need to be. So today, make the decision to see again. See yourself the way God sees you. See your situation through the lens of faith, not fear. See that what God started in you, he is faithful to complete. Your vision isn't lost. It's being restored. And when God restores your sight, you won't just see where you're going. You'll see that he's been with you all along.